Hey everybody, it's the Bald Man once again, and this time we're going to go over your practice FRQ for your test on Monday. You can see it's going to be a long one, but we'll tackle this step by step, so no big deal. So let's start off with the beginning, right? It says the economy of Macrostan is currently in a recession. Draw a single correctly labeled short run and long run Phillips curve graph. Label the initial short run equilibrium point as A. All right, so we can indeed do that. Let's do A, and we're going to do a Phillips curve graph. So it's going to be inflation rate, unemployment rate, our long run aggregate supply. I'm sorry, not aggregate supply. Don't let that happen to you guys. So it's LRPC for long run Phillips curve. Short run Phillips curve, our natural rate of unemployment. And I said we were currently in a recession. So our point needs to be to the right of the LRPC. And this would put us approximately at this point right here. Okay, let's go back and keep going. So B says the banking system in Macrostan has ample reserves. Identify a monetary policy action that would be most effective in restoring the economy to full employment in the short run. All right, so if they have ample reserves, there's only one monetary action that they could do to help bring them back to our equilibrium point, back to a natural rate of unemployment. And it would have to be an expansionary monetary policy. But again, we have ample reserves. So there's only one thing they could do, and that would be lower interest on reserves. Right? So that's what they need to do. They need to lower interest on reserves. So C says draw a correctly labeled reserve market graph and show the effect of the monetary policy action identified in Part B on the policy rate. Okay, so let's do C. We need to do a reserve market graph. We have policy rate to the left, quantity of reserves, demand of reserves, and since we have ample reserves, our supply of reserves would have to go right around there. Now, we said that they were going to have to lower the interest on reserves, right? So how would we show this here? Well, suppose that they are currently paying 4%. They are going to want to lower that. And now they are going to be paying 1%. So they lowered the interest on reserves. What is that going to cause to happen? Well, since the Fed is now going to be paying only 1% interest on any money that you have in the Fed, your banks are going to want to pull it out, put it in their own vaults, and lend it out in order to earn more money. All right, so that answers that part. Now let's go to D. D says, based on the change in policy rate identified in Part C, what will happen to aggregate demand in the short run? Explain. Okay, so D, aggregate demand will increase because of lowered interest rates, which encourage more borrowing, which leads to more spending. All right, so that answers D. Let's move on. E says, on your graph from Part A, label a point B that shows the effect of the change in the aggregate demand identified in Part D. Okay, so that would be E, right? So E, I'm just going to draw a little arrow over here, and I'm going to put my point B here, and we're going to show our movement along the curve. Remember the rule: if aggregate demand moves, we move along the curve. If aggregate supply moves, then we shift the curve. So let's move on to F. F says, assume Macrostand has limited reserves. Identify an open market operation that could help bring the economy into long-run equilibrium. All right, so again, that's F, I believe. Yes, it is F. If they do have limited reserves and they're asking for an open market operation that could bring the economy into long-run equilibrium, in this case, they would have to buy bonds. All right, let's get moving. G says, draw a correctly labeled graph of the money market showing the effects of the open market operation in part F. Okay. So G, I'm going to do my money market graph. And we said buy bonds, and buy bonds means big bucks. So we would expand the money supply, and that would lower nominal interest rates. And since nominal interest rates go down, so would real interest rates. So that's F. Now let's move on to G. I'm sorry, that was G. Let's move on to H. H says the policymakers decide to pursue a fiscal policy rather than a monetary policy in Part B. Assume that the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9 and the value of the recessionary gap is $500 billion. So H1. If the government decides to change spending without changing its taxes to eliminate the recessionary gap, calculate the minimum required change in government spending to close the gap. Show your work. Okay, so our MPC is 0.9 and we have a $500 billion gap. And that was H. Yes, it was. Okay, so H will get to 1. And so what are we doing here? We need to find the multiplier first, and it's going to be 1 over 0.1 because our MPC was 0.9. Our MPS has to be 0.1. Why? Because MPS and MPS plus MPS have to equal to 1. This is actually 1 over 1/10, which means my multiplier is 10. $500 billion is our shortfall. Divide that by 10, and we're going to get 50. So that isn't our correct answer, though, right? The government here would have to increase government spending by $50 billion in order to close the gap. Now, H2 says, if the government changes taxes without changing government spending to eliminate the recessionary gap, will the minimum required change in taxes be, I need to fix that, be smaller than, greater than, or equal to the minimum required change in government spending in Part F1 explain. So here we would have to say that they would have to decrease taxes. It would have to be greater than 50 billion. Why do we say that? It's because the tax multiplier is weaker than the spending multiplier. And that would be the conclusion of this FRQ. If you guys have any questions, please drop a comment down below or send me a message on Remind.